I can't believe this is how I'm starting my day, Randy muttered, squinting against the hammering rain. He stood on the steeply slanted roof of a modest suburban house, the shingles slick and shiny in the pouring mid-spring rain. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, pitch dark except for the single beam of his headlamp cutting through the torrent. His back ached from 10 straight hours on the assembly line. His hands were raw, stinging each time they scraped against the coarse texture of the roof. Yet he gritted his teeth and continued his work, repositioning a strip of flashing that had peeled away. Or, at least, that's what his wife Elaine had told him. The roof's leaking in the living room, she had texted at 3:30 a.m., her words unemotional, as if it were simply his job to fix. After twisting a final nail into place, Randy inched along the edge of the roof until he found the ladder he'd propped against the gutter. The wind threatened to yank him off at any moment. He paused and murmured under his breath, "Don't slip now, or they'll just find me sprawled on the driveway by sunrise." He climbed down carefully, step by step, legs burning, every muscle exhausted from the combination of physical labor at work and these unexpected house repairs. Once his feet touched wet concrete, relief flooded him. At least no more climbing. Shaking out his numb hands, he forced his stiff limbs toward the side door leading into the kitchen. "I'm done," he breathed, half to himself as he fumbled with his keys. "They'd better appreciate this." Randy pushed through the kitchen door, drenched to the bone. He expected to see Elaine, maybe looking concerned or at least awake, given she had summoned him home. Instead, he saw her leaning against the counter, scrolling idly on her phone. She offered him only the faintest glance. "It's done," Randy said, trying to keep the exhaustion out of his voice. "The leak should hold until we can get someone out here to check for water damage." Elaine responded with a low grunt. She turned her head just far enough to meet his gaze for a second, then shrugged. "Great," she said. That single word floated through the stale air like a begrudging courtesy. No actual gratitude, no apology for dragging him onto the roof in the middle of a storm after a grueling shift. Randy swallowed the urge to argue. He was too drained. "I'm going to bed," he said. Elaine tapped at her phone, her eyes drifting back to the screen. "Fine," she said. "I'll deal with the living room later." Randy didn't even have the energy to change out of his soaked clothes. He toed off his boots, peeled away the dripping jacket, and lumbered down the hall to the bedroom. Every muscle in his back throbbed. He collapsed onto the bed, his eyelids closing before his head fully hit the pillow. He slept like a stone, but only for about 4 hours. A harsh shaking startled him awake. Elaine's fingers dug into his shoulder. When he groaned and tried to roll away, she yanked harder. "Get up," she said, her voice ice cold. Randy blinked the sleep from his eyes, his heart pounding. He glanced at the clock on his phone. 9:30 a.m. Not even close to a full night's rest. Craig, his 19-year-old stepson, stood in the doorway with an amused grin. "Is something else leaking?" Randy said, yawning. "That's not why we're here," Elaine replied. Her arms were folded tight and her jaw was set. Her gaze flicked toward 3 large black trash bags piled by the bedroom door. Clothes, clearly his clothes, were spilling from the top. Randy stared. What's going on?" Elaine's lip curled. "I want you out," she said. "You're dead weight, Randy. I've carried you for too long. Go mooch off someone else." Her words felt like a physical blow. Randy struggled to sit upright. "What the heck are you talking about? We've been married for 7 years." "Yeah, and that was 7 years of you controlling finances and whining about bills," Craig said, stepping into the room. He kicked one of the trash bags so that it slumped over. "Mom's done with you. She found a real man who actually has money to fix this place up, right?" The insolent smirk on Craig's face made Randy want to shout, but confusion overwhelmed everything else. He forced himself to speak calmly. "You've got to be kidding me. I just spent half the night on the roof, fixing it for you two, and you're—" Elaine narrowed her eyes. "Pack your junk. You've got 5 minutes before I call the cops." Randy stared at her, heart pounding. His gaze darted to his wallet on the nightstand. He reached for it, flipping it open with trembling fingers. The cash he had, $200 for emergencies, was gone. "You robbed me," he said, voice low. "Serves you right for being a control freak," Craig said, crossing his arms. "Mom's been talking to Steve. He's my boss at the car shop. Real successful guy. They've been going out for months, and it's pretty serious. He even helped her figure out how to get you off the deed." "What the heck are you talking about?" Randy snapped. "Steve's a real man," Elaine said. "He doesn't nitpick every grocery receipt or whine about credit cards being maxed out. He's going to take care of us. Now get out, or I'll dial 911 and say you're trespassing." This time, Randy let his anger rise. Trespassing. This is my house too, he roared. Craig whipped out his phone and started filming. Here we go, he said mockingly. Let's see him lose his mind. Randy considered grabbing the phone and hurling it across the room, but he knew that's exactly what they wanted. Footage of him acting violent. Instead, he stood up, shoulders trembling. Elaine, he said softly, this is insane. If you want a divorce, fine, but you can't just steal everything and kick me out. That's not how this works. Elaine pointed at the trash bags. I can, and I am. You have 4 minutes left. Clock's ticking. Feeling numb, Randy stumbled toward the bedroom door, half in a daze. He snatched up the trash bags, wincing at the sheer weight of them. He tried one last appeal. Elaine, we can handle this like adults. I'll sleep on the couch if you want time to think. But you can't just... Time's up, she snapped. She jerked her head at Craig, who grabbed Randy by the shoulder and spun him around. Move, Craig said. You heard her. They marched Randy to the front door. Through the hallway, he saw a handwritten note taped on the fridge. The words, scribbled in black marker, read, You're dead weight. Get out. I'm find a real man. The phrase, I'm find a real man, looked jarringly ungrammatical. Randy wondered if Elaine had been in such a rush to scrawl her parting insult that she forgot to proofread. The meaning still cut deep, though. Give me a second to grab some water, Randy pleaded, his throat dry as sandpaper. Elaine's hand shot out, slamming against his chest. Don't even think about it, she hissed. Out now. Craig tossed the truck keys at him. They jingled as they hit the floor by his feet. Go cry in your truck, he said with a sneer. Don't come back. Before Randy could muster a retort, they shoved him out onto the front step. The cold morning air stung his face. Then the door slammed behind him, and he heard the solid sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. For a moment, he stood there, his soaked shirt clinging to his skin, the trash bags leaving dark smudges of rainwater on his arms. His brain struggled to reconcile the reality that his wife and stepson, people he had lived with and cared for, had just physically pushed him out of his own front door. He tried calling Elaine's phone. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He lifted his gaze to the window, saw the curtain shift, recognized Craig's grinning face. Unbelievable, Randy breathed. Stuffing the trash bags in the bed of his old pickup, he slid into the driver's seat. He turned the key, but for a long moment he just sat there, engine idling, unsure of where to go. The next 3 days were a surreal blur. Randy slept in the cab of his pickup, parked in a deserted corner of a 24-hour supermarket lot. He changed clothes in grimy restrooms, showered at the local gym, and ate whatever fast food he could afford. He felt equal measures of rage and heartbreak. At times, he caught himself wanting to dial Elaine's number again, to beg her to reconsider. Other times, he fantasized about marching up to the house, kicking down the door and demanding his rightful place. But with each hour that passed, the hopelessness dug in deeper. Late on the third night, he dozed off in the driver's seat, only to be awakened by a knock at the window. Startled, he jerked upright to see an elderly security guard shining a flashlight at him. Hey, buddy, the guard said through the glass. You can't sleep here all night. Management'll have a fit. Randy groaned, fumbling for the handle. I'll move, he said, voice thick with fatigue. He drove to a nearby all-night diner instead, parked in the back, and tried to catch some shut-eye there. His back cramped, and his mental state slipped further into despair. The next afternoon at work, his coworker Wyatt cornered him in the break room. Dude, you look like a zombie, Wyatt said. You wearing the same clothes as yesterday? Randy sank onto a plastic chair. Yeah, he murmured. Life's complicated. Wyatt folded his arms. Complicated how? Randy hesitated, then sighed, letting the entire story spill out. The roof, the eviction, the stolen money, the cheating. Wyatt's eyes widened as he listened, eventually muttering curses under his breath. You can't live in your truck, Wyatt said when Randy finished. Look, I got a couch. It's not fancy, but it's better than your pickup. Randy opened his mouth to protest. He'd never been one to beg for help, but the truth was he had nowhere else to go. Finally, he nodded. Thanks, he whispered. I owe you, man. Wyatt's couch was lumpy and smelled faintly of old pizza, but it was a welcome step up from the truck. Randy slept there for a couple of weeks, saving every cent from his paychecks to find a place. Finally, he managed to secure a tiny studio apartment. Calling it a studio was generous. It was more like a dingy box with a kitchenette tacked on. The shower took forever to run hot, and if he used the microwave at the same time as the toaster, The fuse would blow. But it was his own. One evening, Randy scrolled through social media on his outdated phone, curious if Elaine was flaunting her new boyfriend publicly. Sure enough, he found a photo on her profile, Elaine in a new blouse, hair done up, with a tall, well-dressed man. The caption read, "Starting a new chapter with my real man." Randy ground his teeth. There was no mention of the havoc she'd wrought or the money she'd stolen. Even more infuriating were the pictures of Craig, bragging about his brand new gaming rig and his souped-up used car. The post read, "Hard work pays off," which Randy found laughable. He tapped out a text to Elaine. "You stole my wallet money. That's theft. We need to split our assets fairly." Within seconds, the phone buzzed with her curt reply. "Stop bothering me, or I'll file a restraining order. Good luck." A thick wave of anger washed over him. He'd given years of his life to this woman, tried to help raise her ungrateful son, and now she threatened him at every turn. Fine, he thought. Time to fight back the right way. He contacted a lawyer recommended by Wyatt. His name was Frank Mulligan, a short man in his late 50s who had a reputation for being ruthless in court. Randy arrived at Mulligan's cramped office, a folder of bank statements and property documents clutched in his hands. "Explain the situation," Frank said, leaning back in his chair. Randy did, starting with the roof fiasco, ending with living in his truck. Frank flipped through the papers. "You say you inherited this house from your grandfather 5 years ago?" Frank asked. "Yeah," Randy replied. "When Grandpa died, he left it to me. But I got married 2 years before that, so I always assumed it was co-owned." Frank arched an eyebrow. "Only if you added her name to the deed or refinanced in both names, did you?" Randy's mind raced. Everything had been a blur after his grandfather passed. He distinctly recalled they never got around to redoing the paperwork. "I guess no," Randy said slowly. "Then the house is still 100% in your name," Frank said, "which means your wife illegally forced you out of your own property." Randy felt his heart stutter. "Seriously?" he said. "So what? She has no legal claim?" "As of right now, no," Frank said, tapping a finger on the page. "We can file an eviction notice to get her out. This might take a few weeks, but once the sheriff's involved, she'll have to go." Randy took a trembling breath. He was half relieved, half furious. Elaine had treated him like dirt, spread lies that the house was hers, and she'd done so with zero legal grounds. Frank picked up another set of papers. "Is this a forgery?" he asked, pointing to a loan document referencing $25,000. "Yeah," Randy said, swallowing. "I found that after I moved out. She took out a loan using the house as collateral. She forged my signature. I had no idea." "That's a felony," Frank said, shaking his head. "Fraud. We can pursue both civil and criminal charges. Are you sure you want to go down that route?" Randy exhaled slowly. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm done being the doormat." Frank nodded. "All right, we'll handle it step by step. Eviction, financial claims, and we'll alert the bank about the forged documents." "She'll face charges." A flicker of guilt tugged at Randy. He didn't like the idea of sending Elaine to prison, but she'd stolen thousands from him, and she'd physically forced him out of a house that wasn't even hers. "All right," Randy said firmly. "Let's do it." It didn't take long for Frank to prepare the necessary paperwork. On a damp Monday morning, Randy met Frank and a local sheriff 2 blocks away from his home. His home, he reminded himself. "You ready?" Frank asked. Randy felt his stomach knot. "Let's get it over with," he said, stepping out of the car. At 9 a.m. sharp, the 3 of them approached the front door. The sheriff rapped on it with a gloved hand. Inside, Randy glimpsed a flurry of movement through the window. The door swung open to reveal Craig, bleary-eyed, wearing pajama pants. "What do you want?" Craig said, voice thick with sleep. Before Randy could speak, Frank cleared his throat. "Craig, correct? We have legal documents for your mother, Elaine. She has 48 hours to vacate the premises, as this property is owned solely by Randy." Craig's eyes flicked to Randy. Are you serious?" Elaine appeared behind him, wearing a silken robe. The moment she noticed Randy, her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" she demanded. The sheriff stepped forward, offering the papers. "Ma'am, you've been served an eviction notice. You're required to leave within 48 hours. Additionally, there are fraud allegations regarding a forged loan." Elaine snatched the papers, scanning them frantically. "This is my house," she spat. "He left. He abandoned it." "No," Randy said, stepping forward. "I never abandoned anything. You threw me out, remember?" Craig puffed out his chest, as if ready for a fight. "Don't talk to my mom like that," he growled. "This is harassment. I'll call the cops." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "I am the cops," he said dryly. Elaine's voice trembled with rage. "You controlling, pathetic man," she hissed at Randy. "You think you can just march in here with your stupid lawyer and kick me out after everything I've invested?" Randy's emotions churned, but he kept his expression cold. "You invested with my money," he said, "and you stole from me. That new TV? That new paint job? You used the loan you forged." Elaine's face flamed. "I did all that because you never gave us anything. You barely made enough to cover the bills." Randy's mind flashed with every hour of overtime he'd worked, every borderline humiliating second job he'd taken to ensure they had some semblance of comfort. A bitter laugh escaped him. "The sheriff will be back in 48 hours, Frank said calmly. "If you're not gone by then, you'll be removed." Elaine's voice cracked. "Where are we supposed to go?" Craig glowered at Randy. "He doesn't care. You're a monster," he said. "Mom only stayed with you out of pity." At that, Randy bristled. "If I'm such a monster," he snapped, "then pack up your brand new gaming rig that you bought with my money and get out." Craig stepped forward as if to swing at Randy, but the sheriff placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Enough," the sheriff warned. Elaine's expression shifted from fury to desperation. "Randy, please, we can talk about this," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "Don't just throw us out." "You gave me 5 minutes to grab trash bags before threatening to call the cops," Randy reminded her, voice hoarse. "I'm giving you 48 hours. Consider it generous." Without another word, he turned away and walked back to Frank's car. His heart hammered, but a cold satisfaction pulsed through him. The next 2 days were an onslaught of calls and texts from Elaine and Craig. Randy ignored them at Frank's instruction, forwarding each message to the lawyer. Some messages were apologetic, others threatening. "You're going to regret this," read one text from Craig. "Please, we have no place to go," read another from Elaine. "I'll make sure everyone knows what a controlling freak you are," threatened a third from Elaine. When the 48-hour deadline hit, Randy returned to the house with the sheriff, uncertain what scene awaited them. There was a small U-Haul in the driveway. The door was open, and Craig was hauling out boxes with a furious scowl. Elaine stood on the porch, eyes red and puffy. "You happy now?" she snarled when Randy stepped onto the lawn. He ignored her and walked inside to survey the damage. His heart sank at the sight. Holes punched in the drywall, broken furniture, a half-finished paint job that left streaks of bright purple across the living room. Stacks of garbage and empty beer cans littered the floor. "What did you do?" Randy said, his voice trembling with anger. Elaine followed him inside. "We made some upgrades, okay? Which I'm sure you're going to tear down. You never appreciated anything I did." He couldn't even find words. The sheriff walked through, taking note of the condition of the property, snapping pictures for evidence. "Let's finish this up," the sheriff said to Elaine and Craig. "Load your stuff and leave now." Craig stared daggers at Randy. You can't do this," he said, desperation lacing his tone. "Mom put so much into this place. Steve was supposed to help her, but he bailed. Now we have nothing." Randy shrugged, trying to mask the swirl of old grief. "Maybe you shouldn't have stolen from me," he said. Elaine shot him a look that could curdle milk. "You'll regret this," she said. "I promise." He simply turned away. He had no more patience for threats or guilt trips. Soon enough, they finished cramming their possessions into the U-Haul. Craig's new car was conspicuously missing from the driveway, and Randy guessed it had been repossessed when the forged loan defaulted. The mental image almost made him smirk. Outside, as the sheriff took his final notes, Elaine stood trembling on the porch. She tried one last time. "You controlling monster," she said. "You never let me spend a dime without lecturing me. Don't pretend you're innocent in all this." "Funny. You maxed out every credit card and took a second loan in my name," Randy replied. "But sure, blame me. Now leave." Craig hurled one last venomous glare before stomping down the driveway and climbing into the passenger seat of the U-Haul. The engine rumbled. Elaine cast one final look at Randy, a mixture of hatred and a strange, desperate sadness. Then she clambered in, and the truck rumbled off, leaving him standing there in a swirl of dust and leftover tension. The house was eerily silent once they were gone. Randy walked from room to room, taking in the chaos. He felt a strange mixture of triumph and grief. This was his house. He'd won that battle. But the cost had been high. Wyatt arrived a few hours later with beer and pizza, offering a grin. "Congratulations, man," he said. Home sweet home again. Yeah, Randy said, shaking his head as he surveyed the damage. It's just not how I pictured it. Wyatt nodded sympathetically. Well, you've got a roof, battered as it is, he said. Could be worse. Ready to fix it up? They set about bagging trash, cleaning up shards of glass, and pulling out remnants of the half-finished remodeling. Randy felt something like closure taking root, but he knew the journey wasn't over. The forgery charges were still looming over Elaine's head, and the banks would come calling soon enough. Later that night, he settled onto an old camping mattress in the master bedroom. His bedroom. The quiet pressed in on him. He stared at the ceiling, remembering how close he'd come to truly losing everything. Weeks passed. Randy received updates from Frank about the fraud case. The bank had launched a full investigation, and there was talk of pressing charges against Elaine for the forged signatures. Meanwhile, rumors reached him that Elaine and Craig were couch hopping at various relatives' places. One night, around 2 a.m., Randy jolted awake to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. He sat up, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding his veins. The house should have been empty. He wasn't expecting any visitors. He fumbled in the dark, unlocking the bedside safe where he kept a Magnum revolver for protection. The cold steel settled in his hand as he crept down the hallway, trying to control his shaking breaths. "What the heck?" he whispered. Downstairs, he heard hushed voices. A flashlight beam swept across the living room walls. Randy's stomach dropped when he recognized the faint outline of two figures rummaging through drawers. "This has to be where he keeps important docs," came a muffled voice. He recognized that voice. Elaine. "Mom, hurry," whispered the other figure. "I don't want him waking up." That had to be Craig. Randy cursed under his breath. Why were they here, breaking in at 2 in the morning? Rage flared in his gut. He flicked on the small flashlight attached to his revolver, pointed it in their direction, and barked, "Don't move!" Elaine spun around, a startled cry escaping her lips. Craig dropped something, maybe a crowbar or a metal tool, and raised his hands. "Randy, wait, don't shoot," Elaine shrieked. "We just came to get some stuff I left, okay? Personal items. It's not a big deal." Randy's heart hammered. The memory of being tossed out onto the front step, the humiliation, the stolen money, it all surged in his mind. "Then why break a window?" Randy demanded. "Why not call me or your lawyer if you needed something? Are you insane?" Craig's eyes darted to the revolver, panic twisting his features. "Put the Colt down, man," he said. "We're not here to hurt you. We're just taking what belongs to us." Randy stepped closer, forcing them back toward the broken window. His flashlight illuminated Elaine's furious, tear-streaked face. "You have no right to anything here," Randy said, voice trembling with anger. "You forfeited that the day you kicked me out." Elaine tried to move toward him, and he cocked the hammer back on the revolver. The metallic click echoed through the room. "Stay back," Randy hissed. Craig began to lift his arms as if to grab the crowbar again. Randy fired a warning shot into the ceiling, plaster raining down. Elaine screamed, covering her head, and Craig jumped back, face ashen. "You're crazy," Elaine shouted, voice cracking. "We had every right to come here for my mother's jewelry or my documents." "Do you see how you left this house?" Randy snapped, shining the flashlight around at the still visible vandalism. "If you needed something, you should have gone through the proper channels. You broke in, with a crowbar." He whipped out his phone, still training the tool on them. His finger hovered over the emergency dial. "Don't call the cops," Craig said, eyes wild. "Too late," Randy growled, pressing the button. In a trembling voice, he told the dispatcher there was a break-in in progress, that he'd fired a warning shot. The dispatcher advised him to stay on the line until officers arrived. "I'm not letting you take anything," Randy said, breathing hard. "You'll wait right here for the police." Elaine's composure shattered. She started sobbing, though Randy heard an undercurrent of fury beneath the tears. "You're pointing a tool at the woman you married. What kind of monster does that?" "The same kind you kicked out in the middle of a storm after robbing him," Randy snarled. "Stay put." In the distance, the sound of sirens grew, the warbling alarm drawing closer. Craig looked ready to bolt, but one shake of Randy's Colt had him rooted to the spot. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the busted window. Cops poured in, tools drawn. Randy slowly placed his Magnum on the floor and raised his hands as one officer approached. "That's him," Randy said, nodding toward Craig. He was armed with a crowbar. They broke the window to get in. "This is my house, officer." Within seconds, they had Elaine and Craig on their knees, handcuffing them. Elaine's shrieks filled the living room. "I told you, I used to live here. He changed the locks." "He's my husband." One officer asked for proof that Randy was the sole homeowner, and Randy quickly produced the deed and the eviction order on his phone. He also showed them the bullet hole in the ceiling. Elaine glared at him, tears streaking her cheeks. "You could have killed us," she spat. Randy felt a surge of raw guilt, but also a certainty that he'd had no choice. They'd broken in, brandishing a crowbar in the dead of night. "You brought this on yourself," Randy said quietly. The officers marched Elaine and Craig outside to the waiting patrol cars. Neighbors peeked from their windows, drawn by the flashing lights in the aftermath of the gunshot. The air felt charged with a quiet tension. With Elaine and Craig detained, Randy gave his statement to the officers. They jotted down every detail: the break-in, the crowbar, the forged loan, the legal eviction. One of them recognized Elaine from the prior incident where she'd assaulted an officer during the eviction. "She's out on bail already," the officer said, shaking his head. "Well, I guess she's going back in tonight." Randy watched from the living room window as Elaine and Craig were loaded into separate squad cars, each of them straining to get the last word in. Elaine's voice rose, muffled by the closed windows of the police cruiser. Randy couldn't make out her words, but he could guess it was a string of accusations, curses, and vitriol aimed at him. Craig slumped in the back of the other car, despair written across his features. The cars pulled away, sirens blipping briefly. Randy stood in the front yard, the night air cool against his sweaty skin, the porch light casting a glare on the shattered window. The entire episode felt like a fever dream. An officer patted him on the shoulder. "We'll need you to come by the station to file a formal complaint," he said. "From what you've told us, they'll be facing charges for burglary, trespassing, and attempted assault if that crowbar was intended to threaten you." Randy let out a shaky breath. "I'll be there," he said. "Get some rest," the officer said gently. "You did what you had to do." By dawn, Randy was sprawled on the couch, too wired to sleep. The bullet hole in the ceiling mocked him every time he glanced at it. A part of him hated that he'd needed to fire a warning shot. Another part of him was certain he'd had no choice. In the days that followed, news of Elaine and Craig's arrest reached the ears of relatives. A few tried contacting Randy, either to get his side of the story or to accuse him of being a heartless bastard. He offered the same response to everyone. "They committed fraud, took out loans in my name, then broke in. I was protecting my house." A week later, Frank called him with updates. "They're both in serious legal trouble," Frank said. "Elaine's out on bail again, but the district attorney is pressing charges for the forgery. Craig might get a lighter sentence for the break-in, but he'll have a record." Randy sighed. "What about the stuff they claim they left behind?" "They have to file a motion if they want anything," Frank replied. "And if a judge grants it, they'll have to retrieve it under supervision. No more midnight visits." Randy nodded, relief flooding him. "Good, I'm done playing these games." Life settled into a new normal for Randy. He spent his free time repairing the damage in his house, patching holes in walls, scrubbing paint splatters, ordering new windows. Bit by bit, the space started feeling like a home again, a home that was truly his. He occasionally thought back on his marriage, questioning where it all went wrong. He knew he wasn't perfect. He had insisted on strict budgets and hammered Elaine about her spending habits. But in the end, she'd made choices that were not just unkind, but criminal. She'd allied with her son to humiliate him, cheat on him, and attempt to steal everything he owned. One evening, as he stood in the freshly repainted kitchen, he noticed faint remnants of the note Elaine had once taped to the fridge. "You're dead weight. Get out. I'm find a real man." He recalled that sinking feeling of seeing his clothes in garbage bags, of having her and Craig smirk as they locked him out. So much had happened since that moment. Nights in his truck, a bitter legal struggle, and finally, that gunshot that proved how desperate things had become. He peeled away the last scrap of tape left behind from the note and threw it into the trash. Then he breathed deeply, letting the tension drain from his body. The next day, he canceled the tuition payments he had once planned to make for Craig's college. For years, he'd footed the bills for that entitled kid, hoping to forge a good relationship. But now, it felt almost laughable that Craig expected him to keep paying. That bridge was well and truly burned. Sure enough, Craig texted him days later, some rambling tirade about how he owed him tuition. Randy simply blocked the number.